Korriban Transmissions presents Star Wars From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker, Chapter 2, Part 1. It was an old settler's tale, saying that you could burn your eyes out faster by staring straight and hard at the sun-scorched flatlands of Tatooine than by looking directly at its two huge suns themselves. So powerful was the penetrating glare reflected from those endless wastes. Despite the glare, life could and did exist in the flatlands, formed by long evaporated seabeds. One thing made it possible: the reintroduction of water. For human purposes, however, the water of Tatooine was only marginally accessible. The atmosphere yielded its moisture with reluctance. It had to be coaxed down out of the hard blue sky. Coaxed, forced, yanked down into the parched surface. Two figures whose concern was obtaining that moisture were standing on a slight rise of one of those inhospitable flats. One of the pair was stiff and metallic, a sand-pitted vaporator sunk securely through sand and into deeper rock. The figure next to it was a good deal more animated, though no less sun-weathered. Luke Skywalker was twice the age of the 10-year-old vaporator, but much less secure. At the moment, he was swearing softly at a recalcitrant valve adjuster on the temperamental device. From time to time, he resorted to some unsubtle pounding in place of using the appropriate tool. Neither method worked very well. Luke was sure that the lubricants used on the vaporators went out of their way to attract sand, beckoning seductively to small abrasive particles with an oily gleam. He wiped sweat from his forehead and leaned back for a moment. The most prepossessing thing about that young man was his name. A light breeze tugged at his shaggy hair and baggy work tunic as he regarded the device. No point in staying angry at it, he counseled himself. It's only an unintelligent machine. As Luke considered his predicament, a third figure appeared, scooting out from behind the vaporator to fumble awkwardly at the damaged section. Only 3 of the Treadwell model robot's 6 arms were functioning, and these had seen more wear than the boots on Luke's feet. The machine moved with unsteady stop-and-start motions. Luke gazed at it sadly, then inclined his head to study the sky. Still no sign of a cloud, and he knew there never would be unless he got the vaporator working. He was about to try once again when a small, intense gleam of light caught his eye. Quickly, he slipped the carefully cleaned set of macro binoculars from his utility belt and focused the lenses inward. For long moments he stared, wishing all the while that he had a real telescope instead of the binocs. As he stared, vaporators, the heat, and the day's remaining chores were forgotten. Clipping the binoculars back onto his belt, Luke turned and dashed for the land speeder. Halfway to the vehicle, he thought to call behind him. "Hurry up!" he shouted impatiently. "What are you waiting for? Get it in gear!" The Treadwell started toward him, hesitated, and then commenced spinning in a tight circle, smoke belching from every joint. Luke shouted further instructions, then finally gave up in disgust when he realized that it would take more than words to motivate the Treadwell again. For a moment, Luke hesitated at leaving the machine behind, but, he argued to himself, its vital components were obviously shot. So he jumped into the land speeder, causing the recently repaired repulsion floater to list alarmingly to one side until he was able to equalize weight distribution by sliding behind the controls. Maintaining its altitude slightly above the sandy ground, the light-duty transport vehicle steadied itself like a boat in a heavy sea. Luke gunned the engine, which whined in protest, and sand erupted behind the floater as he aimed the craft toward the distant town of Anchorhead. Behind him, a pitiful beacon of black smoke from the burning robot continued to rise into the clear desert air. It wouldn't be there when Luke returned. There were scavengers of metal as well as flesh in the wide wastes of Tatooine. Metal and stone structures bleached white by the glaze of twin Tattoo 1 and 2 huddled together tightly, for company as much as for protection. They formed the nexus of the widespread farming community of Anchorhead. Presently, the dusty, unpaved streets were quiet, deserted. Sandflies buzzed lazily in the cracked eaves of poor stone buildings. A dog barked in the distance, the sole sign of habitation, until a lone woman appeared and started across the street. Her metallic sun shawl was pulled tight around her. Something made her look up, tired eyes squinting into the distance. The sound suddenly leaped in volume as a shining rectangular shape came roaring around a far corner. Her eyes popped as the vehicle bore down on her, showing no sign of altering its path. She had to scramble to get out of its way. Panting and waving an angry fist after the land speeder, she raised her voice over the sound of its passage. "Won't you kids ever learn to slow down?" Luke might have seen her, but he certainly didn't hear her. In both cases, his attention was focused elsewhere as he pulled up behind a long, low, concrete station. Various coils and rods jutted from its top and sides. Tatooine's relentless sand waves broke in frozen yellow spume against the station's walls. No one had bothered to clear them away. There was no point. They would only return again the following day. Luke slammed the front door aside and shouted, "Hey!" A rugged young man in mechanic's dress sat sprawled in a chair behind a station's unkempt control desk. Sunscreen oil had kept his skin from burning. The skin of the girl on his lap had been equally protected, and there was a great deal more of the protected area in view. Somehow, even dried sweat looked good on her. "Hey, everybody!" Luke yelled again, having elicited something less than an overwhelming response with his first cry. He ran toward the instrument room at the rear of the station, while the mechanic, half asleep, ran a hand across his face and mumbled, "Did I hear a young noise blast through here?" The girl on his lap stretched sensuously, her well-worn clothing tugging in various intriguing directions. Her voice was casually throaty. "Oh," she yawned. "That was just Wormy on one of his rampages." Deke and Windy looked up from the computer-assisted pool game as Luke burst into the room. They were dressed much like Luke, although their clothing was better fit and somewhat less exercised. All three youths contrasted strikingly with the burly, handsome player at the far side of the table. From neatly clipped hair to his precision-cut uniform, he stood out in the room like an oriental poppy in a sea of oats. Behind the three humans, a soft hum came from where a repair robot was working patiently on a broken piece of station equipment. "Shape it up, you guys!" Luke yelled excitedly. Then he noticed the older man in the uniform. The subject of his suddenly startled gaze recognized him simultaneously. "Biggs!" The man's face twisted into a half-grin. "Hello, Luke." Then they were embracing each other warmly. Luke finally stood away, openly admiring the other's uniform. "I didn't know you were back. When did you get in?" The confidence in the other's voice bordered the realm of smugness, without quite entering it. "Just a while ago. I wanted to surprise you, hotshot." He indicated the room. "I thought you'd be here with these other two night crawlers." Deke and Windy both smiled. "I certainly didn't expect you to be out working." He laughed easily, a laugh few people found resistible. "The academy didn't change you much," Luke commented. "But you're back so soon." His expression grew concerned. "Hey, what happened? Didn't you get your commission?" There was something evasive about Biggs as he replied, looking slightly away. "Well, of course I got it. Signed to serve aboard the freighter Rand Ecliptic just last week. First Mate Biggs Darklighter at your service." He performed a twisting salute, half serious, half humorous, then grinned that overbearing yet ingratiating grin again. "I just came back to say goodbye to all you unfortunate landlocked simpletons." They all laughed, until Luke suddenly remembered what had brought him here in such a hurry. "I almost forgot," he told them, his initial excitement returning. "There's a battle going on right here in our system. Come and look." Deke looked disappointed. "Not another one of your epic battles, Luke. Haven't you dreamed up enough of them? Forget it." "Forget it? Hell, I'm serious. It's a battle, all right." With words and shoves, he managed to cajole the occupants of the station out into the strong sunlight. Kami in particular looked disgusted. "This had better be worth it, Luke," she warned him, shading her eyes against the glare. Luke already had his macro binoculars out and was searching the heavens. It only took a moment for him to fix on a particular spot. "I told you," he insisted. "There they are." Biggs moved alongside him and reached for the binoculars as the others strained unaided eyes. A slight readjustment provided just enough magnification for Biggs to make out 2 silvery specks against the dark blue. "That's no battle, hotshot," he decided, lowering his binocs and regarding his friend gently. "They're just sitting there. 2 ships, all right. Probably a barge loading a freighter, since Tatooine hasn't got an orbital station." "There was a lot of firing earlier," Luke added. His initial enthusiasm was beginning to falter under the withering assurance of his older friend. Cammy grabbed the binoculars away from Biggs, banging them slightly against a support pillar in the process. Luke took them away from her quickly, inspecting the casing for damage. "Take it easy with those." "Don't worry so much, Wormy," she sneered. Luke took a step toward her, then halted as the huskier mechanic easily interposed himself between them and favored Luke with a warning smile. Luke considered, shrugged the incident away. "I'm telling you, Luke," the mechanic said, with the air of a man tired of repeating the same story to no avail. "The rebellion is a long way from here. I doubt if the Empire would fight to keep this system. Believe me, Tatooine is a big hunk of nothing." His audience began to fade back into the station before Luke could mutter a reply. Fixer had his arm around Cammy, and the 2 of them were chuckling over Luke's ineptitude. Even Deke and Windy were murmuring among themselves. About him, Luke was certain. He followed them, but not without a last glance back up into the distant specks. One thing he was sure of were the flashes of light he had seen between the 2 ships. They hadn't been caused by the suns of Tatooine reflecting off metal. The binding that locked the girl's hands behind her back was primitive and effective. The constant attention of the squad of heavily armed troopers favored her with what might have been out of place for one small female, except for the fact that their lives depended on her being delivered safely. While she deliberately slowed her pace, however, it became apparent that her captors did not mind mistreating her a little. One of the armored figures shoved her brutally in the small of the back, and she nearly fell. Turning, she gave the offending soldier a vicious look, but she could not tell if it had any effect, since the man's face was completely hidden by his armored helmet. The hallway they eventually emerged into was still smoking around the edges of the smoldering cavity blasted through the hull of the fighter. A portable accessway had been sealed to it, and a circlet of light showed at the far end of the tunnel, bridging space between the rebel craft and the cruiser. A shadow moved over her as she turned from inspecting the accessway, startling her despite her usually unshakable self-control. Above her towered the threatening bulk of Darth Vader, red eyes glaring behind the hideous breath mask. A muscle twitched in one smooth cheek, but other than that, the girl didn't react. Nor was there the slightest shake in her voice. "Darth Vader, I should have known. Only you would be so bold and so stupid. Well, the Imperial Senate will not sit still for this. When they hear you have attacked a diplomatic
Senator Leia Organa,"
Vader rumbled softly, though strongly enough to override her protests. His pleasure at finding her was evident in the way he savored every syllable.
"Don't play your games with me, Your Highness,"
he continued ominously.
"You aren't on any mercy mission this time. You passed directly through a restricted system, ignoring numerous warnings and completely disregarding orders to turn about until it no longer mattered."
The huge metal skull dipped close.
"I know that several transmissions were beamed to this vessel by spies within that system. When we traced those transmissions back to the individuals with whom they originated, they had the poor grace to kill themselves before they could be questioned. I want to know what happened to the data they sent you."
Neither Vader's words nor his inimical presence appeared to have any effect on the girl. "I don't know what you're blathering about," she snapped, looking away from him. "I'm a member of the Senate on a diplomatic mission to—"
"You're part of the Rebel Alliance,"
Vader declared, cutting her off accusingly.
"You're also a traitor."
His gaze went to a nearby officer.
"Take her away."
She succeeded in reaching him with her spit, which hissed against the still-hot battle armor. He wiped the offensive matter away silently, watching her with interest as she was marched through the accessway into the cruiser. A tall, slim soldier wearing the sign of Imperial Commander attracted Vader's attention as he came up next to him. "Holding her is dangerous," he ventured, likewise looking after her as she was escorted to the cruiser. "If word of this does get out, there will be much unrest in the Senate. It will generate sympathy for the rebels." The commander looked up at the unreadable metal face, then added in an offhanded manner, "She should be destroyed immediately."
"No. My first duty is to locate that hidden fortress of theirs,"
Vader replied easily.
"All the rebel spies have been eliminated, by our hand or by their own. Therefore, she is my only key to discovering its location. I intend to make full use of her. If necessary, I will use her up, but I will learn the location of the rebel base."
The commander pursed his lips, shook his head slightly, perhaps a bit sympathetically, as he considered the woman. "She'll die before she gives you any information." Vader's reply was chilling in its indifference.
"Leave that to me."
He considered a moment, then went on.
"Send out a wideband distress signal. Indicate that the Senator's ship encountered an unexpected meteorite cluster it could not avoid. Readings indicate that the shift shields were overridden and the ship was holed to the point of vacating 95% of its atmosphere. Inform her father and the Senate that all aboard were killed."
A cluster of tired-looking troops marched purposefully up to their commander and the Dark Lord. Vader eyed them expectantly. "The data tapes in question are not aboard this ship. There is no valuable information in the ship's storage banks and no evidence of bank erasure," the officer in charge recited mechanically. "Nor were any transmissions directed outward from the ship from the time we made contact. A malfunctioning lifeboat pod was ejected during the fighting, but it was confirmed at the time that no life forms were on board." Vader appeared thoughtful.
"It could have been a malfunctioning pod,"
he mused.
"That might have also contained the tapes. Tapes are not life forms. In all probability, any native finding them would be ignorant of their importance and would likely clear them for his own use. Still, send down a detachment pod to retrieve them, or make certain they are not in the pod,"
he finally ordered the commander and attentive officer.
"Be as subtle as possible. There is no need to attract attention, even on this miserable outpost world."
As the officer and troops departed, Vader turned his gaze back to the commander.
"Vaporize this fighter. We don't want to leave anything. As for the pod, I cannot take the chance it was a simple malfunction. The data it might contain could prove too damaging. See to this personally, Commander. If those data tapes exist, they must be retrieved or destroyed at all costs."
Then he added with satisfaction,
"With that accomplished and the Senator in our hands, we will see the end of this absurd rebellion."
"It shall be as you direct, Lord Vader," the commander acknowledged. Both men entered the access way to the cruiser.